Hi, good evening. I'd like to call to order this regular meeting of the Boulder Valley Board of Education for Tuesday, February 13th. And Laura, would you please call the roll?
Benford. Fuqua. Garcia. Gephardt. Marquis.
Here.
Myers. Sargent.
Here.
And please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So I'd like to remind everybody that the mission of the Boulder Valley School District is to create challenging, meaningful, and engaging learning opportunities so that all children thrive and are prepared for successful, civically engaged lives. Thank you all for joining us, for coming here out to the Education Center, and for those of you joining at your homes, listening at home, and we're glad to have you here. Our first item is the Superintendent's report.
Well, tonight we have the great good pleasure to honor two people. Kathy Gephardt will be honoring Stan Garnett, and Sam Fuqua will be honoring Angie Looper Jinks. Did I get that right? And we are so pleased to recognize the accomplishments of the Boulder Valley School District and its supporters. And so we need to say thank you to those folks, and we will be recognizing them later. Wanted you all to know that because you've been interested in start times, I have met with the middle school principals and the senior high principals. And I have to tell you that we have an incredibly strong leadership group that really looked at the question and began to pose solutions to how we could do the start times. Now, you know it would take us a year, but we're in the process of talking with our principals and with the bus terminal and seeing what are our possibilities. So we do still think there would be a cost, but I will tell you that the principals are eager and ready to make it work if that's the direction we go. So I wanted you to know that about start times. I know that Kathy Gephardt and I and several other staff members have both met with our Latino parents group called Parity the last couple of weeks. The staff was there last week, and I think it was a very productive time. We responded to questions, we heard their concerns, what they're interested in, and it was really a very, very, I think, useful evening. We also wanted you to know that we have completed the Respectful Workplace training. Cabinet has gone through the training, and we had the same consultant work with all of our leadership staff. Basically, I think it's gone well, and I felt like we were kind of ahead of the rest of the nation, so I think it's gone very well. You are going to be considering the superintendent's finance bill tonight, or the bill that the superintendents are backing in the legislature, which I will have some more comments on later. And I think that's it for tonight.
Well, it is my distinct honor to be able to recognize one of Boulder's outstanding citizens, DA Stan Garnett. So I think I'll just read from this and then ad-lib a little, and I think others, if they have things to add, can add, if that's all right with you, Madam President. Next, we would like to take a moment to celebrate the work of one of Boulder Valley School District's former board members. Boulder District Attorney Stan Garnett is with us tonight. Will you come up, please? As you may know, Stan will be leaving his post as Boulder's top prosecutor at the end of the month and will be taking a senior partner position at a private law firm in Denver. He is in his third and final term as DA and is the second longest tenured Boulder County District Attorney since the state was founded. In his 10 years in the position, he has done so much, protecting the most vulnerable members of our community. He said that he is most proud of the work he and his staff have done in community protection, sexual assault, and cold case prosecution. The DA has also shown unwavering support for DACA recipients and immigrants in our community. And his counterpart in Denver, Ryan Brackley, who used to work for Stan, credits him making the Boulder DA's office a leader in the state by, quote, bringing a unique vision to how a public law office should run. We are incredibly proud that Stan is part of our institution's history and our community's legacy. Thank you for your service to Boulder County and the state of Colorado. So for now, let's. And I would just like to add, Stan, that I really appreciate the work you've done with the high schools and the youth in our school district around the issues of restorative justice and the school-to-prison pipeline, and trying to make sure that students do not engage in the school-to-prison pipeline. And I've met with some of your staff around those issues, and I know you've built an incredible staff and have a huge passion for the youth in our community, and have been very supportive, not only in just your role and on the school board, but in your role as DA. And so I am very thankful, and I think many families in this community are thankful for all the great work you've done on that. So I just want to add my own personal thanks to that. So,
Thank you.
Stan, it's going to be a loss to seeing you leave the DA's office, but I know that you're going to be around Boulder County for forever, probably. I just want to acknowledge Stan because you single-handedly, I think, mobilized thousands and thousands of community members post elections to assure the families that are here that you do not enforce federal law, that you enforce state law, just to reassure the community of immigrants that they have nothing to fear as long as they're here in Boulder County. I just want to thank you so much for that, because I personally attended a couple of those particular large convenings that you had. And you answered a lot of questions. You had a lot of people on the panel that were answering questions. I think you did what a lot of people couldn't do, and that's to reassure the Latino immigrant community, in Boulder County. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Rachel.
Stan, we're going to really miss you in Boulder, and I want to thank you. I don't want to repeat everything Kathy said, but your work in restorative justice has been just, has really set an example, I think, for districts across the country. So I want to thank you for that, and also for your advice to me over the years, and just for having served as such a great board member when you were here. So thank you so much for everything.
I would add my thanks to Stan. You've changed my view of what a county district attorney can and should be in a very positive way, and I've appreciated your wise counsel over many years as well. And which is harder, being a school board member or DA? Always ask a question you know the answer to, right?
You want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll tell you. There's no question that being on the school board is one of the hardest jobs in public life. You know, it's funny, as a district attorney, people sort of assume you know what you're doing, and they accord you a certain amount of deference as you sort through an issue. And I loved every year I was on the school board, from 1997 to 2005. But I became impressed with how intense this community can be about pretty much everything, and the challenge that all of you have to sort through issues and try to be fair and try to make the right decisions. So I admire the work you do. I enjoyed doing it myself when I started doing it 21 years ago, and I had many good hours, long hours in this board room. So keep up the good work, and I admire it. But there's no question that being a district attorney is easier than being a school board member.
I just want to add to what everybody has already said, Stan. And also, I just appreciate the work you've done with child abuse and prosecuting more offenders. I think that really sends a good message to our community that we take victimizing children very seriously. And thank you for everything you've done. I appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you.
I'll say thank you also.
Thank you.
We'll miss you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll echo that too. We're going to miss you. Thank you for the advice you've given me the couple times that I've reached out, and you were so responsive, and I always appreciate how you responded to me personally. You never asked me to go somewhere else. It was just very fast, and I really appreciate it. We're going to miss you a lot.
That's great.
So thank you so much.
Well, let me just say a couple other things, because, I am a lawyer, so you get me at a podium and I'm going to go on for a while. We are very fortunate in the 20th Judicial District, which is Boulder County, to have 2 excellent school districts. And there's no question that the number one way to keep crime down and to keep the community safe is to make sure that we do a great job of educating the young people that are coming through the community. Boulder Valley does a terrific job of that. We all appreciate it. I appreciate it. The police chiefs in Boulder Valley appreciate it, as does the sheriff. Keep up the good work. Keep focused on helping kids sort through issues in a way that's proportional to whatever their behavior is, and help them graduate and move forward. Because if we do that, we're going to continue to keep crime rates low and keep this a safe community. So thank you guys for the work you do, and this is very kind. Thank you for the recognition tonight.
Okay, and we have a second recognition.
We do. Thanks, Stan. Let's have another round of applause. And now retired BVSD teacher Angie Looper-Inks is going to come on up. Welcome, Angie. Angie retired 2.5 years ago after more than 3 decades in teaching. She got her start in Summit County, and she moved to Boulder Valley in 1988 as an English teacher at Fairview High School. She wanted to stay involved in education and found the perfect opportunity with the YWCA Boulder County's Reading to End Racism program. She now regularly visits classrooms here in the BVSD as well as St. Vrain, reading stories to students and engaging students in discussions around racism, bullying, and oppression. Recently, her efforts were recognized by 9 News as one of the year's 9 Who Cares winners. The prestigious award is given to volunteers who have made a great difference in the community. Thank you, Angie, so much for contributing to BVSD, both during your many years as a teacher and for continuing your service through Reading to End Racism, which is really a life-changing program. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I just want to say that I'm just one of many people that work in the program, and I really appreciate the recognition because it's really nice to get the support at the district, because it's important work, and teachers are all working on those sorts of things, but it's nice for them to get a little taste every once in a while. And one of the things that the kids say, I always ask them, what can I do better? And a couple of times they keep saying, well, what can we do? And they really do want to help with oppression and learn about it. They're so curious and they want to know more. And so it's great. I know there's a lot of work happening in the district, so thank you for all that you do. So thank you.
Angie, I want to thank you too. I know that it takes a lot of time to do this. The work that I've been a reader, by the way, in terms of at University Hill Elementary School. I read there a couple of times. And you do such excellent work, and the YWCA does such excellent work in terms of ending racism. Thank you so much for the work.
Thank you.
And thank you so much. We just appreciate all that you're giving to our district. It's wonderful.
And I want to thank you too. I admire your passion, but your willingness to give of yourself even after retirement.
I have to get my kid fixed. It kind of gets, you don't, once a teacher, you have to do something. Thank you.
Okay, so all right, our next item is public hearing and public participation. The board recognizes the value of public comment on issues related to the operation of the schools. To ensure that our meeting is conducted in an orderly manner, we ask that persons who address the board confine your comments to matters that are germane to the business of the school district. Speakers on agenda items will be heard first, followed by those speaking to non-agenda items. Limit your presentation to 2 minutes. If we go over the first hour, public comment will continue at the end of the meeting. Recognize that students often attend or view our meetings. Speakers' remarks, therefore, should be suitable for an audience that includes kindergarten through 12th grade students. The board president may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant's statement that is unrelated to the business of the district or inappropriate for K through 12 students. There is a lighting system on the podium, starting at green when your 2 minutes starts, turning to yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and turning to red at the end. When the light turns red, please wrap up your comments so that the board can hear from the maximum number of speakers. Okay, so we don't have any speakers tonight on agenda items, and so we're going to move to non-agenda items, and we'll start with Harold Halstein.
Ms. Marquez,
I'm sorry.
before the speakers begin, I do have some information that they might find useful, if I can.
Okay.
I just wanted everyone to know. You will notice that the staff has not put the Lakeshore real estate contract back on the agenda tonight, and that there is a recently received charter school application which includes the use of the Lakeshore property among the facility options for consideration. And given that there is no urgency to selling the property, staff recommends letting the charter application review process play out. But you will see that that property sale is not on your agenda.
Thank you. So our first person who signed up is Harold Halstein. Welcome.
Good evening, school board members. I'm Harold Hallstein. I am here to talk about land dedications briefly. I'm delighted to hear that we're perhaps entertaining a use that was conceived for this land originally at the time that the school district received it. I've learned over the last few years quite a bit about the land dedication process. I'm a local investment advisor with a particular practice in land conservation. And I also serve a board of directors of an organization in Idaho that does a lot of public lands work. I was pleased recently to be involved with the movement of the outdoor retailer show from Utah to Colorado, simply to teach legislators in Utah a lesson about how much we value our public lands in this country. This particular issue is deeply meaningful for me. I've read the code, I've read the law back and front, and I'm very clear on how it was set up and the processes required to take this land out of the quasi-preserved state that it is in, which is for school and park uses only. Two wonderful and great uses. A charter school, it just delights me to hear that perhaps we may consider that kind of usage for it. I reviewed the video footage from the previous meeting, and I have to say that it made me quite uncomfortable, some of the things that I saw being said and heard. There was some excellent work done by some board members on this, and I feel like a certain amount of desire on the part of other board members to accept at face value what your legal advisors have told you about this parcel, despite the fact that many well-educated residents who are politically involved here in town have also mentioned otherwise. There's a lot of countervailing facts in this particular case. I certainly believe a high percentage, more than 50% of this land is certainly dedicated and should have to go through a dual body process to be released for general sale. Is that the red light there? Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to get into it more later. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Our next speaker tonight is Christina Louis. I hope I got that right.
You got it that right. Nicely done. Hi, everybody. Thank you for this public participation process. My husband, Carl Hill, might be joining me as we might be pulling together 2 + 2 minutes = 4. So coming back to the Lakeshore Estates proposed land sale, I'm here to remind you of your duty as the elected officials to be accountable, transparent, and good neighbors. You need to hold a public meeting. I understand this is a public participation process, part of this school board meeting, but having a public meeting with the neighbors who are affected by any proposed land sale or other use is required. You need to do this. We are neighbors, we are taxpayers, we are voters. The second thing I want to talk about is, oh wait, actually, that was point number 2. Okay, so I request that you hold a public meeting about this proposed land sale like you did back in 2010. You know, things have changed. A bunch of us are new to the neighborhood. It's important that you do this and hold it with the neighbors and seek and hear their input. Third thing I want to say is documentation exists that indicates the land is dedicated for a school. If it's going to be a charter school, fantastic. if you're considering selling the land to the highest bidder in order to fund a school somewhere else, you need to go through due process. So I request that you do not sign the contract with world's largest commercial real estate firm, CBRE, until you go through the due process. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carl Hill.
Well, thank you. I'll be brief. I sent you all, each of you, an email, so I've been a teacher myself since 1979, and I still am, and I really appreciate your service to the community and to our school children. What I was going to say has already been said. I think that I would like you to be good neighbors, and I would like to, we had 35 people at our house the other night who were discussing pretty much these issues and saying, we want to be part of the process, and I think we have shared goals between you and the rest of the community members, and that we can find a solution that'll work for all of us. But we would like you to be transparent in the spirit of the sunshine laws of the state of Colorado. So, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Emily Burks.
Good evening. I'd like to yield my 2 minutes to Craig Held. Thank you.
And I think I'm after that, so that's proper order. Hi. Thanks for the time. My name's Craig Held. I live at 633 Swallow Lane in the Reserve, and I'm the president of the Reserve Homeowners Association. I've got two hats on tonight. I've got the president's hat and my own personal hat on. I'll try to keep those two separate. First, as president of the Reserve Homeowners Association, I would like to let you know that as a board, that our board voted to spend some money to take a look at the legal limitations and implications of the board's behavior to date on the Stearns Field. Simply stated, the lack of transparency, which other people have referenced, as to what is an end game with CBRE and the board's intent, the disregard for your own policies, which state how you're going to dispose of dedicated lands, despite your legal opinion that it really wasn't dedicated, has inflamed the neighborhood to a degree, so the board voted to spend money. The complete document is here, and I'd like it entered in the record, so maybe I hand it to Laura. You all are going to get emails. I have some more copies, but my printer ran out of ink. But I didn't put all the attachments to it, so I think you've got it. One hard copy is enough. I killed enough trees today. We now understand the CBRE discussion has been postponed and charter schools being considered for Stearns Field. While we celebrate the postponement, the association really wants to know what was going on that we got to that point. Our association asks you to be a good neighbor, be transparent, disclose your intent for Stearns Field. You're currently denying a CORA request, hiding what we feel like is behind false assumptions. One of your own board members was not functioning in a legal function, has submitted to this board a memo that in part has point of view that these dedicated lands may not be easily sold in the fashion you were pursuing. You as a board discussed this board member's point of view at a meeting, but you won't disclose the contents, claiming it's work product. The definition of work product, as I understand it, and our legal people have said, it is when somebody is functioning as counsel. So your board member was not functioning as counsel. So work product and denying a CORA request is at least suspect. Getting my association of 94 residences and over $100 million in taxable valuation, ask you to be transparent with your intent. My own opinion, you all said to the Daily Camera when you were running for office that for the elected office you hold, you thought the BVSD should be more transparent. Less than 4 months since that election, if how you've handled the sale of the Stearns Field defines transparency for you, it doesn't seem like it being on the recipient of the process you were starting to go to. Emily Burks, another Reserve resident, has sent you all emails how we can work together. I, for one, would like to see you live up your campaign comments to transparency and stop hiding behind the bureaucratic posturing you've done to date. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Tanya Kumalat. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Tanya Kumalat. My husband and I'm also here to talk about the Stearns Field open space. And I just want to say my husband and I are both products of the BVSD school system, so thank you very much. We're proud to have been residents of this wonderful neighborhood for 8 years. We now have 2 kids, one of which will be starting at Douglas next fall, actually. And we just love this space, and we're just hoping that it gets used as public space, as at least a portion of it was originally dedicated towards. And, you know, if a charter school happens to go in there, fantastic, because I hope that means that we can get a park, that I don't have to drive my kids to go play at a park, because right now we don't have access to that. So this open space is where my kids play and where they run around, and that we just learn about the world through. And I just would love to explore that a portion of this property, if it did get sold, that it still remained in public use. You know, I understand that eventually something might have to go there, but I just ask that you as a school board will hold an open dialogue with us as a neighborhood as to how we see that going, and just continue to be good neighbors for us. So thank you very much, and I appreciate all that you do.
Thanks so much. Our next speaker is Janet Kerner, or Corner.
Hi, I'm Janet Kerner. First of all, I want to thank you for all the work you do. I know personally that being on a board is a lot of work, and it's a big commitment to the community, and I really appreciate that. But speaking of commitment and community, I'm going to say pretty much what everybody else already said. Each of you stated before you were elected that open communication with the community, accountability with the community, and transparency with the community were all very important to you and something for which you would each strive. This is all I'm asking you to do with the Stearns property. Please, there's no rush to sell this property. This land has been around for 50+ years. I believe a process that involves the community input will lead to the correct use of the land and will make everyone feel as if they had a say. I'm a neighbor that lives on the meadow that the board is discussing selling. We need to discuss what the original intent of the school district was when the land was originally acquired. Was it actually for a real estate investment, or was it for the use of the good of the community? If the original plat of the land has the word dedicated on it, which I believe that I've seen, I believe the land was originally intended for open space as a park or for a school. If you're going to build a school on it, great. This beautiful meadow has been widely used and greatly enjoyed over the past 50 years as open space and has been very good for this community. If that was the original intent of the land, why take it away from our community? And if you feel like you need to take it away, then I believe the board needs to take the proper steps to sell the piece of dedicated property before you vote on signing a contract with any real estate company. Please be a good neighbor, be accountable to the community, and listen to our voices. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Michael Wagoner.
Hello, I'm Michael Wagoner, a longtime resident of the community. Proud to have 2 students who went from kindergarten through high school in the district. I taught at the University of Colorado for many years and was happy to see many products of this school system do fine jobs in graduate school. I think that the word that there'll be, the next step will be to consider having a charter school there means that a lot of what I hope to say was moved. I mean, there is good reason that we can present the documentation that at least parts of this land were dedications that require extra procedures before they may be sold or otherwise disposed of. We think that the charter school is just an ideal use of this land. And notice, looking at the map, that this land is very close to Sombrero Marsh, and marshes are great ways for children, great areas for children to learn about the world. I hope that the charter school is there and that the students can then make use of these great resources. I think that things are going so well with the charter school announcement that I don't need to extend this anymore. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Lynn.
Segal, that's for the record, S-E-G-A-L, not sale. So that's my statement, don't sell Lakeshore. And certainly not to CBRE. And this sets a precedent regarding the south field in Twin Lakes. And I don't know all the specifics of this, but I can tell you this. I don't want centralized schools. We cannot afford centralized schools anymore. It drives up the cost of transportation and the lack of community integration. Dedicated means dedicated. Leave it at the site and consider the objectives of the city and the county. With regards to transportation issues, you're not just an independent thing and you just want to do the best for the school district and centralized schools. It's not good for the students. It's not good for the community. Drives up the costs of housing, which drives up in population, and that drives up the cost of education, which is contrary to the objective of the Boulder Valley School District. So also, I'm opposed to charter schools and vouchers. And I really like the idea of being by Sombrero March where Oak Leaf Thorns Nature Center is for kids. Excellent, but not a charter school.
Thank you so much for coming. I believe that concludes our public participation. And our next item on the agenda is board communication. Who would like to start? Richard, thanks.
Well, I want to thank all the speakers that were here. Thank you very much. I want to give a big shout out to Randy Barber and Ari. They did an excellent job in putting together the Latino Parent Summit, not Summit, the Latino Parent Forum, where they discussed many, many items as it relates to the superintendent search. I know they've accumulated tons of notes, and I'm hoping that soon they'll have those notes ready for us to at least read and take into consideration when we're interviewing our next superintendent in Boulder Valley School District. I also want to thank Bianca Gallegos, principal at Columbine, Guillermo, can I remember his last name? Medina, principal at Pioneer, and Ina Myers Rodriguez, there you go, principal at University Hill. They were there with their parents, and they represented the school district very, very well. So thank you very much for that, Randy, and thank Ari for me too when you see him. Great work. I floated around and I heard a lot of input from our Latino parents, and I'm hoping that we come up with some good candidates for our next superintendent here in Boulder Valley Schools. Thank you.
Comments? Donna?
I'm here to let you know that the audit committee reviewed the financials of the last 6 months yesterday and the mid-year analysis, and I'm happy to report that spending and revenues are on track and with our revised budget. And also, there's still yet one board member to be appointed to that committee, and I'll inform you of that later, but it was a great meeting.
Other comments? Kathy?
As Cindy said, I attended a meeting last night with the parents from the Parity Movement, or Parity Organization, and it was a great organizational meeting. We talked about how to your point, Richard, walk through what it's like to come talk at the podium and how you sign in and when the meetings are and what the topics can be. And so we had a lot of conversations around that and around what's going well, what's going not so well in the district. And Ari was there. And so it was just great to see the parents come out on a cold night and take the time to engage with the community, and I just hope we can continue to have more of those kinds of meetings. So thank you to Ari and to the district for setting that up. And then last week I had the honor of being a judge for National History Day at Southern Hills, and I was quite thankful to be involved in doing that. And every time I go and watch these kids' presentation, it was compromise and controversy, and I got to watch the drama piece of it. And these kids, you could just watch them; they'd be so nervous, and then they'd get into their presentation, and they were just awesome. And so that was a really wonderful opportunity, and I was felt really thankful to be able to have that as a opportunity. So that's all. Oh, and the other thing I'll share is that I was able to go with as part of the CASB delegation team to Washington, D.C. for lobbying our congressmen and senators in D.C. And the big issues from the National School Boards Association was renewing the Carl Perkins Act, which is vocational rehabilitation, full funding for special education finance. Those were two of the big issues. I'm not sure that we'll see much on those fronts, but it was, I thought, really encouraging that was the top two priorities from the National School Boards Association. And it was just great to be able to connect with other school board members from around the country and share the passion and commitment for public education. So I really appreciated the opportunity to do that, and I'm happy to share any of the documents and information I got from that with other school board members here, but I don't want to take up more time tonight at the board table.
Okay, anyone else? Sam or Shelley? Shelley?
Yeah, I want to thank everyone who came to speak tonight on the issue of Lakeshore Estates. I agree that there needs to be more clarity around whether a portion of that land was dedicated or not, and so that we can dispose of it in a way that is consistent with our policy and with the county's procedures. And I also agree that we need more community input into this, so I'll be advocating for that, as well as total transparency around what we are planning to do there. So I welcome a public meeting or any other continued discussion on this issue. So thank you very much for coming forward. Oh, one more thing. Thank you. I want to congratulate Casey Andringa, who's out there somewhere, and his parents. Casey finished 5th in the world in the freestyle skiing event in the Olympics. He went to school with my daughter at Horizons, and he went up through Boulder Valley School District, and I just want to say how proud we are of him. So.
Great, yeah. Just thanks, folks, for coming out. We heard you loud and clear, and we appreciate your participation. I'm just going to put in one more plug for Reading to End Racism. You know, Angie Looper Inks talked about it. I've taken the training. It's good training. You shadow an experienced reader, and it's just great to be in the classrooms talking through these issues with kids who have such great questions and ideas and desire to learn about how to build a better world. So I encourage everybody to reach out, if you have some free time, to the YWCA of Boulder County and participate in Reading to End Racism.
I just wanted to reiterate the thanks to all of you who have come out tonight and to those who aren't here but who contacted us about Lakeshore Estates. Your passion really shows, and I agree that we need to involve the community in any process that we take going forward. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for coming here, and I always appreciate feedback about transparency. I think that's something that the whole board is always committed to, so thanks for giving us that reminder. I also just wanted to thank, first of all, Randy Barber, who had the thought of starting to recognize some of the people who are doing outstanding work in our district and our community. We recognize 2 people tonight, and it was really uplifting as a board member to think about the work I'm doing and how important it is, and it was a really nice way to start off our meeting, so I just want to thank you for persevering with that. And I also just want to remind the public how busy the board is right now, and to thank Laura, who's trying to juggle this incredible schedule that we have. And we were talking the other day, and she said, you guys have to do 5 things. You got to get through this. You got the budget, HB 1375, a summit, application, hiring a superintendent, and a union contract negotiation. That's a lot of work for the next 3.5 months. So I really appreciate all the work staff is doing. This is a lot of stuff going on. And I appreciate how everyone's hanging in there and supporting the board and making it so we can do our work and keep the district running and keep serving the students when there's really some uncertainty in the air. And if you haven't looked at our calendar lately, next Tuesday is when we look at our first batch of resumes for superintendents. And from there, it's just a sprint. And so we will probably be a little distracted for the next month. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So our next agenda item is our action items. So I'm going to read these. Get my glasses. 6.1 personnel items. 6.2 approval of minutes January 23rd, 2017 special meeting. 6.3 approval of minutes January 23rd, 2017 regular meeting. Approval of minutes January 30th, 2018 special meeting. 6.5 acceptance of donation Foothill Elementary. 6.6 closeout to the construction manager general contractor contract for bond-funded improvement work at Emerald Elementary School. 6.7 closeout to the construction manager general contractor contract for bond-funded work at the Louisville Middle School renovation. 6.8 grant Arapahoe Campus Active Learning Center, Steelcase Education 18. 6.9 grant Centaurus High School Active Learning Center, Steelcase Education 18. 6.10 grant Monarch K-8 School Active Learning Center, Steelcase Education. Are there any board members that any items that board members would like to pull from consent grouping? Board members, no? Okay, hearing none, we need a motion to approve the items on consent agenda. Kathy, second by Kitty. Laura, will you please call the roll on consent grouping?
Benford. Fuqua.
Yes.
Garcia.
Yes.
Gebhardt.
Yes.
Marquis.
Yes.
Myers.
Yes.
Sargent.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay, are there any comments or questions about the consent items? Action items, sorry, anyone? Yes.
I was just really impressed with the Steelcase Education grant that they're writing, and it sounds like they have the opportunity to get some really innovative furniture in the schools, and so I'm just really happy to hear about that.
Yeah, great. Any other comments? Okay, hearing none. Laura, would you please call the vote on the motion? Oh.
We just did.
Oh, sorry.
I can.
Okay. Thank you. Wait, so did we accept these items then? Yes. Oh, then we're done. How did I miss this one up? Okay. Okay.
Because you asked us to make a comment after we voted.
Okay. All right, so then we're on to study items. Okay. And our first item is 8.1, a resolution in support of a modernized school finance act. And so are you going to give some background about this? Okay.
Yes. We wanted all of our audience and all of our board members to know that you have the resolution tonight, and Bill Sutter will talk with you about it. This has been a long process, and currently 171 of the superintendents in Colorado, and there are only 178, have signed off supporting this bill. The bill has been introduced, and the thing that strikes me, and Bill has much greater knowledge than I do, but the thing that strikes me about the new school finance proposal is that it's very student-centered, so that students are counted on a weighted formula. So you have students who have special needs are no longer one student. They might be 1.3 students or 1.4 students, and there will be weighting assigned to various student categories. Now you might wonder, what would be the point of that? Well, the types of students you have definitely defines the needs in the system. Earlier this evening, Tina was talking about our free and reduced lunch children. They would be weighted more than a 1 in the formula. What that does is it gives you more resources to serve the children who need greater service. So that, in my mind, is the biggest change. There are certainly other ones. And we believe, as we've looked at this, as we've looked at the bill, that this is aligned with the Boulder Valley Statement of Values. It's aligned with the Boulder Valley goals. It's aligned with the belief system of our communities. And what it does is it says that different children need different services, which have different costs. Would it involve an increase in school finance in Colorado? I believe it's $1.5 billion, give or take. It certainly is an increase in the cost, but remember how dramatically underfunded Colorado is. I believe we're about 45th in the nation now. We're about 45th in school funding. So it's a step. It gets rid of our negative factor. It is a student-based formula. It will increase school funding for all systems, some more than others, depending upon your student population. And it has been a long process in Colorado. And I will defer to Bill Sutter to talk more about it. Bill.
Thank you. I have a brief PowerPoint presentation here to go through. All right. So first, I'll start off with a little history about how this came together. So in 2013, superintendents across Colorado started coming together to work to do something about K-12 funding. This led to, in the winter of 2014, the ask letter, if you will remember that, went to the legislature to focus on buying down the negative factor, rather than changing the formula or adding new components to the formula. So that was sort of the impetus to some of this efforts that came through. That morphed into the summer of 2016 with a commitment to really start from scratch. The work started in earnest with data and research to come up with a formula, develop a formula, which I'll describe in some detail here. All right, how's my... Now the page down doesn't want to work. Uh-oh. Correct, I just finished it this afternoon. Well, let's see. Let's see if it'll work on a non-full screen. Yep, it'll work on non-full screen, so it won't look quite as nice, but there we go. And probably almost impossible to read. So these objectives were developed to generate support across as many districts as possible. As you can imagine, with 178 school districts in Colorado, trying to coalesce around a School Finance Act that would benefit most districts, if not all districts, and be supported by all superintendents, or as many as possible, is quite a challenge. So these objectives, ensuring that all districts receive additional funding in a more fair and equitable manner to support current academic standards and accountability systems, creating a student-centric distribution formula utilizing weights for special education, English language learners, and gifted and talented students, as well as students living in poverty, ensuring that at a minimum, every Colorado school district receives a total program amount at or above the current year total program funding calculation, excluding the budget stabilization factor, or the negative factor. Oh my goodness. Next, recognizing and adjusting for cost differences amongst districts related to size, geography, and the cost of doing business. Creating a transparent model, including an increased base amount to begin moving towards total per pupil student funding in Colorado closer to the national average. So this formula is not 100% there, but is getting close. There is some acknowledgement of geographic needs within the funding model. No metric was able to be pulled together or found that's sort of a national standard or something that's put together by a government agency to do this. But for example, there's a district that gave an example of doing a boiler repair where they have to call the firm out of another school district in a major city, and it costs them 2 hours of transportation that they're tacked onto their bill just because they live in a more rural area. Next, we have the legislative requirement. So the legislation must contain language that will ensure that the formula will only be enacted with new resources that allow the model to be fully funded, and any attempt to implement the modernized school finance formula without adequate revenue to fully fund the model must be strongly rejected. This legislative component is critical. We wouldn't want to support something that implemented a new finance act with a new negative factor applied to it, if you will. And this discussion is also separate from the tax policy related to how this should be funded. So the discussion around supporting a resolution for this proposed Finance Act is not supporting any particular ballot measure or anything like this. This is simply talking about this finance formula. Adequacy and equity, as described earlier, were two major components of this. So funding for student characteristics, so that's poverty, English language learners, special education, gifted and talented, full-day kindergarten, and preschool. The poverty component is including both free lunch and reduced price meal, students that qualify for those. So it's expanding the definition of poverty from what's currently in the School Finance Act. And next, also funding for district characteristics such as size and the cost of living. Some definitions just to sort of set the base of what we're talking about. So base funding and categoricals, those are constitutionally defined, so they exist as constitutionally defined items right now. The funded pupil count, so it's currently similar to the current count, incorporating a declining enrollment adjustment and minimum funding at 50 students. Pre-K and kindergarten, so students based on actual service, so either a half-time or full-time for kindergarten, depending on the choice of the district or school, and half-time for pre-K students. And then district size, adjustments for costs related to district size are based on the professional judgment work done for Colorado. And there's also a linear adjustment for that size funding, so it's not, it doesn't set up a cliff relative to a district size where you would lose or gain one student and possibly gain a significant amount of money or lose a significant amount of money. For student weights, as was mentioned, mild and moderate special education students will be funded in this model. The terms that are used in other school finance areas are Tier 1 and Tier 2 students. Severe special education students, Tier 3, will continue to be funded through a categorical. Poverty, as I mentioned, expanding the definition to include reduced price students. Gifted and talented students, so funding for those students' needs within the formula. And then English language learners, so actual funding for the students served and funding on a variable, oh my goodness, this is hard to work with here. Funding for district size, so there's a scale in there for district size that recognizes that very small districts or rural districts, the ones that tend to be small, have additional costs associated with getting support for those students. And then non-English proficient students would continue to be funded through categorical funding. Some unique items, so the cost of living needs to address the differences in staff costs and regional cost differences. It has a limit to its total impact on funding of 95%. Online and Ascent students, so students that are in a multi-district online program would be funded at 95% of base funding, and students in the Ascent program that's continuing after 12th grade would be funded at 100% of base funding. And then the size adjustment, again, based on student count, and is not applied to those weights, but only to just the size of the school district. So this is what we call an additive formula. So the funded pupil count, so based on each student, It's multiplied by the base funding, and then the weight is applied for any individual student. So a student in an additive formula has multiple characteristics. Those additional funding would be applied to each of those characteristics. That is when you multiply the funded student count times those base funding and weights, the total weighted funding before the cost of living. So then apply the cost of living to that total. And then the online and Ascent students and the size adjustment equals total program funding. So this does expand the definition of total program funding. So this is the current estimate for Boulder Valley that would, what the impact to us would be. So our current funding is about $238 million through the School Finance Act. Without the negative factor, that goes up by about $25 million to $261.5 million. And this allocation under this new formula would bring us to just shy of $280 million. There is, it's a little bit of a challenge to tie out these numbers because to any formula that's out there right now defining our current funding, because there are student counts that are included in this formula that are estimates that don't exist yet. So for example, the preschool students in CPP, they fund slots, so they're not necessarily capturing the total number of students that would be applied in this system, as well as students in a full-day kindergarten program. If they're tuition-based across the state, they don't have a way to kind of fully define that. Not huge impacts, but certainly will mean something to each different district. Maybe if I use the mouse, it'll work better. Categorical funding remains in place. There's a high-cost pool for special education. So although special ed students, again, are funded within the formula based on their characteristics, those students, those really high-cost students are funded through the categoricals. So the categorical funding remains in place as it is now, but the funding that is provided is for a smaller pool of students, so it's a much higher reimbursement for each of those students. Same with the non-English proficient students in ELL programs. And then transportation certainly is a very district unique item depending on the size and how spread out your students are in schools, so that's also staying in the categorical, as well as career and technical education. A couple other notes, the supplemental process remains the same for adjustments mid-year, so as student counts come in, that process would go through the legislative process as it does now. October count remains the same, so still the one-day count with a window on either side. 5-year averaging for districts in declining enrollment. There is a new hold harmless allocation for 7 districts to make sure that they do not fall below where they would be today without the negative factor. And there are no changes to the override options or amounts that are currently in law. So real quick, I want to review the legislative platform that was adopted by the Board of Education back on November 14th. This is the school finance portion of the platform. So just to highlight a couple of pieces here, comprehensive reform of the School Finance Act to provide adequate and equitable per pupil funding, restoration of state funding levels to section 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5. Again, adequately funds all state-mandated educational reforms, allows each school district to maintain and increase local override funding approved by voters, and BVSD opposes the repeal or consolidation of any local override funding options. And last, section 2.6 and 2.7, funding to address the needs of students, ELL, talent and gifted special education, transportation and career and technical education, and fully funding voluntary full-day kindergarten and funding for early childhood. So that is the end of the presentation.
Okay. Any questions that board members? Kitty, you want to start that?
When it was talking about the base funding plus and then all the different categories. So if a student fit in more than one of the categories, they would be counted once, say, once in poverty and once in gifted?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone? Donna?
I do have a few questions. At first look, it just looks wonderful. There's a lot of information yet that I still need. Like I said, first glance, everybody benefits, except where does the funding mechanism come from? Is it asking more from our taxpayers? That would be one question. And I think our community has been very supportive. They're good to us. But what I hear is enough. So that's if that's a question, or can you comment on that?
So again, this legislation that's in front of the legislature right now does not speak to any funding mechanism for it. That would require a tax increase of some sort. There are multiple options available. There are groups working on a ballot measure for this fall.
Yes, I will add to that. Great Ed Colorado is really looking at a fall measure in 2018 is what they're looking at currently, and that would be a statewide ballot initiative.
Okay, other questions? Anyone? Richard?
I just have a question for Cindy. You mentioned 178 school districts, 171 are supporting that, the other 7 are not. Who are those other 7?
You know, I don't actually know. Here's what I do know. In the last 2 superintendents' meetings that I've been to, and when I was at the CASE conference, this was a major item of conversation among just about everybody in the room who was there. And the last 2 superintendents' meetings have been very focused on the new school finance. The only district I know of for sure is St. Vrain. And Don Haddad who is a friend, he's made a very public statement that he does not support it. It is the only moderate to large size district that I know that is not supporting it. And I can't tell you the other ones, but I can probably find out for you. St. Vrain is the only one I know.
Okay, Kathy?
Well, I think we have to be careful when we say whether districts are supporting it, because I think it's mostly superintendents. Is that a fair statement?
Thank you, Kathy. That was a good clarification. Thank you. Yes, Don personally is not supporting it, and you're right. I certainly can't speak for the citizens of the school district. Thank you.
And I think that's true across the state. We don't know what other school districts have done. Is that a fair statement, Bill? I think it's the superintendents have stated their support, but not districts.
Correct. I'm not aware of any other district that has put forth a resolution as of yet.
So I have a couple questions. Does anybody else? Let Shelley go and then we'll finish.
So I think to Donna's question, it's fairly certain that there will be a tax increase asked for. That's what we talked about, right? The statewide ballot initiative this fall to raise taxes to cover this.
It's no small feat to get the signatures in all Senate districts that is now required because the Amendment 71 passed. So now you can't just get all the signatures for a ballot item in the Front Range area. You have to get them across the state. So that's definitely a big lift to even get it on the ballot. And then it has to pass by 55%.
Mm-hmm. And if that doesn't happen, this doesn't happen, right?
Correct.
There is no other way that this will get funded other than that.
Correct. Not for the somewhere between 1.5 and 1.7 billion that is.
Right.
This.
Okay. So just a couple of questions. You may not be able to answer them now, but it would be helpful to get the answers at some point. I mean, you remember when the last time we tried to do this was Amendment 66, and that did not go well. And one of the reasons it didn't, at least in, there was a lot of discussion in this boardroom about it, and one of the reasons that we voted against supporting that was because caused a lot of money to flow out of BVSD into other districts that had higher populations of these special populations.
Actually, Amendment 66 actually passed in Boulder County
Well, in this board, it didn't. In this boardroom, the vote was 4-3 against.
against supporting it.
That's what I'm talking
Gotcha.
about. Yeah. So, and that was the reason why, because BVSD was going to lose a lot of money to other districts. Now, this one, it sounds like everybody gets funded at their current program level or above, right? So is that just in year one, or in future years, is that also the case? Or if other districts had higher populations of these special populations, would somehow the things tilt away from BVSD over time, or do you know how that would play out?
So it's not a fixed pool of money that then the allocation needs to change to allocate those resources. It's a fixed pool of money to meet the need of the current population of students with those special characteristics in the districts and everything I described. So if poverty went way up in other parts of the state but didn't in Boulder Valley, the total cost of the system would go up. Now, there's language being suggested around supplement, not supplant, so the ability for the legislature to move things around and not fund districts so that we don't get into this negative factor thing again, is being talked about, is included in that ballot language. So there's certainly the possibility of the state running into some fiscal crisis down the road and the legislature having to do something, but that's not as likely with this change.
So we're not completely sure how it might play out over time.
No more than the current formula.
Yeah, and the thing that I would say is that this is not, in every meeting I have gone to, this is not a readjustment of dollars. This is an increase in school funding, which is allocated in a very different way. So it's not that we're going to decrease Boulder Valley and increase Ordway. This is an overall increase in school finance. So I think Shelley's question about, and what if the state has a crisis 5 years from now, whether we have a new funding formula or whether we have the current formula, if the state has a crisis 5 years from now, we are all going to pay a price because funding would have to be reduced. So it is an increase, which we would need a vote to have, but it's also a whole new way of financing.
So, thank you, Cindy. One of my other questions was, so this is $279.8 million in the new formula coming to BVSD, right? So, do we know, have we made an estimate of how much of that would go for special populations versus the regular population under this weighted formula?
So the way this formula works is that it's funding school districts where the local district gets to make the decision how those resources get distributed to meet the needs of students. So there's not a requirement built into the legislation that says you get X amount for special ed, you need to spend it on special ed. We certainly know right now we spend a significantly larger amount of money on special ed than we receive. So in some respects, it could be considered a reimbursement for current expenditures that are not able to be spent, or they could expand programs for whatever is decided.
So there's no formula whatsoever with the money that comes. It's just extra money. And so just a question about St. Vrain. I think his objection was that he felt like this would not pass in the state without some vision of what we were going to do differently in education in Colorado, that there needed to be some shared vision that we could communicate to the voters. And I'm just wondering if the superintendents are taking that comment seriously and trying to come up with something like that in advance of trying to pass this statewide ballot initiative, because we really did see how Amendment 66 went down in a big way across Colorado.
And I think
Those voters weren't really convinced about how we were going to use that money.
Amendment 66 was a really different situation than what we're looking at with this funding formula. Because Amendment 66, I think, first of all, was really hard for voters to understand. It was very complicated. It was really unclear. And I think lots of school districts said to Michael Johnston at the time, this is going to have trouble because it is hard just to grab onto and understand. The voters aren't voting on the finance formula. Voters will vote on an increase in school funding, and that process has started. The petition gatherers are going to be out. It's a petition process, and that process has started. I think two things about the superintendents. I will say to you that, and I've known this group for a long time, and I have never seen this level of commitment and enthusiasm behind an effort. So it was in the Boulder Camera about the vision piece, and I understand that. But I do think school districts have visions. Boulder Valley has a vision for educating our students. It's clearly stated. Our goals are clearly stated, and I think that's the pattern with school districts. So a statewide vision, I'm not sure would be as effective as local visions for what we want for our schools. There are schools, we have our vision, and you can find that in any school district in Colorado that you visit. They can tell you what their vision is. They can tell you their goals. They can tell you what they want for their children. And so I understand what Don Haddad is saying. On the other hand, I think we're pretty clear on what our vision is. I think we're pretty clear on what we want for the children in Boulder Valley. And I'm not sure that if it was a state vision, you'd see more energy behind a ballot initiative. I could be wrong. But I think the energy behind a ballot initiative comes because you love your schools, you see what's happening, you have access to your schools. It's a very local enterprise. So I'm less concerned with the state vision. I'm more concerned that we clearly are articulating what we want for our children. And I get that may not totally answer your question, but if you go to any school district in Colorado, they're quite clear on what they want for their children.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think every district has a vision, and I think we have a good one. I think most of us were part of writing it, so I mean, we feel strongly about it. But I think what most voters probably see is that a lot of kids still can't read, despite our beautiful visions. And so, what's going to be different with this money? And that's what I mean about how do you convince people who see that we're going to do something better and different with this money.
Yeah. And I think that's fair, and I think that you really do look at what's effective. We know some things about class size, and we know some things about good instruction. We know some things about professional development. We know things about how to serve our children with special needs. We know things about how to serve the gifted and talented. So the way I look at that, Shelley, is that we could do things deeper and with more intensity with additional dollars. And don't forget, we want the best and the brightest in this profession. And if you look at college graduates and they're looking at what's my future, it's hard to have a college loan and enter the teaching world. It's very, very hard because of the salaries. So if you even think about compensation and how we keep the best and the brightest doing the work that's incredible work. And I know that you can talk to college kids who say, I would love to teach, but can't afford it. So we have to really think about that. How are we compensating people? How are we keeping people in the field? What intensity are we serving children with? And I think all those are all really fair questions, and we need to really look at that.
Yeah, and Shelley, I think that would be a conversation we should definitely have as a board and with our community if this moves forward and makes it to the ballot. I like that there's relatively few strings attached from what I'm hearing on this money, but if I'm a voter in the Boulder Valley School District, I'm going to want to know what are you going to spend it on. Yeah.
And I agree. I think that we all want successful outcomes for our kiddos. We do. And we all want more money because more money helps generate that. But the clarity here, I hate to use the word transparency because I think it's overused, but clarity for our voters to know what it's going to be used for, I think is important, and I think we have to have a discussion around that.
Just to answer your question about the ballot measure. So as Cindy said, the ballots are printed, it's a graduated income tax, and an increase in the corporate tax. And they're circulating the ballots right now. And the other thing it does is it lowers the assessment rate on both commercial and non-commercial property. So they have to make up for some of that in the numbers that they run. And so it's looking to raise about $1.7 billion through the graduated income tax and through this raise in the corporate tax, just so you know that. And if you look at, I wish, Cindy, it wasn't as complicated as 66, but when you look at this thing, it is long and complicated, even if it doesn't have the school fight, because under TAPER, you have to start off by saying, shall taxes be raised by $1.7 billion? So I worry that people are going to get lost. I get lost halfway down it when I read it. So I just had a couple quick questions. To your points, there isn't anything in the bill or in the statute that helps us be accountable. There's no new accountability measures in any of this. And you said something in your opening slide about how it's going to make accountability systems fair and equitable, but it doesn't touch accountability systems. Is that fair? So to your point, I mean, how are we going to show our voters how we're spending the money?
So I think the suggestion is that there are multiple accountability systems already in place, many of which that have been put in place upon districts without funding. And so this provides funding to help meet CAP for K, unified improvement plans, all those kind of things that have been put into place. So all the existing without adding more on top.
My only pushback is those are pretty dated too, those accountability systems, and don't really measure, I think, some of the things that I think we'd like to see measured. But, and then it says it doesn't go into effect unless it's fully funded. But is the 1.7 really fully funded? I mean, what's the definition of fully funded?
I can't remember if there's a like percent trigger, because I think that was in 66 that, or in the School Finance Act portion of 66, that if it generated not the full amount but something less, it would still go into place. And I believe that the amount of money that is being proposed through the ballot measure will be enough to fully fund it. And if it needs to be tweaked, I mean, that's a decision that certainly can be made at some point in time. If the bill, the School Finance Act, doesn't pass this session, there is language in the ballot that states how those dollars need to be allocated for the same targeted areas: special education, second language learners, poverty. And then it would provide the opportunity in next legislative session for another bite at the apple, if you will, to try again with this same formula, or maybe tweak it or whatever, before the money would actually start rolling in the next fiscal year.
I think my concern is the word fully funded as opposed to adequately funded, or, because full funding to me sounds like nirvana. I don't know that we'll ever get there, and I don't know that 1.7 billion even gets us to full funding. So I guess that's what I'm struggling with, is that language of fully funded as opposed to adequate or equitable funding.
Right.
if that
Fully
makes
funding
sense.
the formula as written for the number of kids in the state or whatever. I mean, it's the formula, funding the formula, versus fully funding education or all the needs. This doesn't even get the state up to the national average on per pupil funding, so.
And Bill, check me, but my understanding is if we are unable to pass a ballot initiative, I'm not sure this could take effect.
Correct, it would
That's
not.
what I thought. So fully funded is we'd have to pass the ballot initiative in the fall.
No, I understand that connection. I was just struggling with the term fully funded.
yeah.
And then a question came up yesterday with the parents from Parity, which is, and maybe you can, it was on preschool funding, and I guess what we're doing is funding a preschooler at half. Was there any conversation about fully funding preschool for 4-year-olds like some other states have done? Is it too expensive? I mean, I was just curious what that conversation was.
No, they're talking about fully funding 5-year-olds, which would be a huge step, but I don't think there's any discussion of fully funding 4-year-olds.
No, not at this time. It's what's included. I think part of it is the lack of data that would be able to come up with a number of what that would be. So I think it's just that halftime is the initial cut. That's what the CPP program is currently running on.
Is it halftime for 5 days or 4 days, or the 4 hours, or is it?
Yeah, it's the somewhat less than actual halftime.
Okay. So Cindy, maybe this question you could answer. We moved this from action item to study item, and so I'm sure this is going to come up on action item. What's the impact? Is each superintendent asking their board to make this decision for every school district, and why are we doing it right now?
Well, we're doing it because we're Boulder Valley and we should be first. You don't have to do it tonight, which is why we've moved it to study. Yes, superintendents are going to be taking it to their boards. We need boards of education across the state to say, we support this new funding concept. So, yes, and we're doing it tonight just because I, this week, thought I should take it to the board. So, but if we put it on study, we can bring it back on the 27th? Soon. It would come back soon.
I mean, and we can put it on study again is another
Absolutely.
option if we feel that we're not quite there yet.
Right.
That's an option. I had a question. Is there a model out, with bonds, we let people know per dollar amount of their house how much their tax is going to be? Do we have an idea of, based on your salary, what's your tax going to look like?
Yes. We don't.
Right, so.
But there is one, yes.
Okay, so that would be great to know, because when we, as Donna mentioned, I have received a little bit of feedback. I think in general our community is supportive and understands the gaps we have in our funding, and they really want to have more teachers and more specialists and more counselors. I think that need is in our community, but on the same time, it's nice to be able to speak to the magnitude of the tax, because there are really different levels, so I don't know what it looks like for individuals. What other questions? Yeah, actually.
I think in light of that question and other questions we might have, that might be good to bring this back for study again. And also, I sent out a suggestion for a little wording change, and I don't know how we want to discuss that, but since we're not going to, this isn't up for a vote tonight.
Right.
Anyway, so I guess I could type that out and redline this or something, if that would be helpful.
Did you send an email?
Yeah, I sent an email.
Okay, got it, okay. Okay. To Cindy's point, I think that the Boulder Valley School District has been involved in this formula with this goal of having a more equitable statewide finance formula, and we can decide if we want to be supportive. It does sound like it's going to be tricky to get to a place where the bill passes and the tax passes. So that's my sense, but we can decide how we want to support that, if at all. Is that?
So given that the bill's going to be voted on this session, correct? If it does not pass, then what happens to the ballot effort?
The ballot effort will move forward, assuming it gets enough signatures to get onto the ballot. They are mutually exclusive in that standpoint.
So, but if the ballot measure gets on, if it gets enough signatures and it's on, then people don't have a framework for knowing how it's going to be spent. Is that right? Like with this bill, you see here's the formula they're proposing. Without the bill,
If the bill is not passed in this legislative session, but we proceed with the tax election, then the money would go into the current school funding formula. Now, we can't predict what's going to happen to the bill in the legislature. So it could be somewhat different by the time, if it emerges, it could certainly be different than the way it's introduced. But if there's a ballot initiative to increase school funding, that would then go to the old formula, the current formula.
I'd like to ask one more question. In the event that the Boulder Valley School District starts to experience a decline in student enrollment, does this soften the impact compared to what we would see under the current finance bill?
Conceptually, no, because they both, current and this proposed, have that 5-year averaging with declining enrollment. So,
Okay.
not in that standpoint.
So it's not going to help out with that situation?
Right, other than there would be more money to start with.
Right.
Which, assuming you don't spend it all to begin with, there's other.
Other questions or comments, board members? Okay, then I think we'll move on to agenda setting. And I have a couple of items for agenda setting. The first is I would like to add a standing item called legislative update. I believe we had this a year or two ago, and that will just enable us to talk about any upcoming legislative issues that we might want to take a position on, or that a board member might seek the board's consensus to take a position on, but we don't have to put it through the agenda setting process. And we can, if I see enough nods, I think we can just do it, if that's okay with everyone. Yes? Okay. And then I think another item is that when we have a recognition, I would just like to add an item called recognition, and maybe we would just add the names of the people we're recognizing, if that's okay with everyone. Okay. And then the other is we've been remiss in doing our committee appointments, so I'm hoping we'll do that on February 27th. So if you go back to your list, we'll send out an updated list of the committees, and then we'll do that on February 27th. And if you're not going to be at that meeting, email me or someone and let me know. Yeah, and you did. Okay. Other items? Yeah.
Yeah. So Cindy, earlier you talked about the start time evaluation that's going on in the district. I'm just wondering that when you bring that forward, that could you also bring forward the transportation study that I think we did 3 years ago that showed us what the additional costs were that were associated with the start?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes, and in fact, I want to have that updated. I haven't gotten to transportation yet. So I want to be able to bring back the full data to you plus the costs, but I need to work with transportation. So
Okay.
I'm assuming we're thinking the year after next, so we have a little time. Is that accurate? Checking in?
I don't even know how this, other than some interests, I don't
Yeah,
know
I
how
mean-
this came up, so.
And I think it's actually on our prioritization list for our next meeting with Heather, is my understanding.
And I was going to say, if it should rise to a priority amongst the majority of board members, that we also perhaps reach out to Cherry Creek and other districts and potentially model the community process that they went through that resulted in a change in their start times.
A couple of us went to Cherry Creek's presentation. I believe you went to the one at Casby, and a couple of us went to Case, and I know at least a staff member who was there I had to leave before it was over, but we can get their information. They're very willing to share their data.
Other items for agenda setting? Okay, thank you. And with that, I think our meeting is adjourned.